So, yeah. Good morning. We will start the second part of this session about the evolution of sustainability measures and indicators. For this part, there is a very little modification compared to the program. So the second speaker will talk first. So we will hear, we will see the presentation of Carl Tornam Duho from, he is a technical director of Dataking Research Lab from Ghana. Yes. Welcome to this session, Carl Tornam Duho. So the floor is you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, can you see my screen? Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to join all of you way in Accra, Ghana, and then listening to you from France. I'm so excited, and I'm grateful for including me as part of the program. I have a short presentation, and having listened to the videos presented in the previous section, I'm so excited. But mine is more of applied research, trying to apply whatever they have discussed, the philosophical understanding of some of the issues and the various arguments. I try to apply how the businesses are employing some of these things. And the topic is on corporate governance and climate change disclosure practices of mining companies in Africa. I'm currently an IMF Youth Fellow trying to look at these sustainability issues, discussing it, connecting it to policy and practice. This is the outline of my presentation. First of all, when we talk about, we have got a lot of discussions on climate change, and we have the program that is about to happen on the climate change meeting and the various other meetings that will occur next year. There have been various organizations that were involved in corporate reporting, and for the accounting reporting practices is the International Financial Reporting Standards Board that has been involved, and then the US has another standard board aside the IFRS, which is involved for the international kind of the global reporting standard setting. But there have also been calls for non-financial disclosures, because aside the core financial issues, there are non-financial issues that are key. And luckily, we have two kind of initiatives. Some of these things were in the literature before, connecting to sustainability, but two terminologies that have become common these days is the SDG, which is one of the UN sanctioned, and then the ESGs, which is more talked about by the corporate organizations. But these days, we see both of these concepts being spoken about in companies. And we see that because they are complex and there's no single regulator, we have various organizations like the Climate Disclosure Standards Board developing various standards on how these things should be carried on and how companies should record and report on these issues. But then we also have the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We have the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, which has various reporting standards, the GRI 200, GRI 300, GRI 400, which has individual indicators, more than 60 indicators under all of them. Then we also see that recently we are seeing kind of a combination of the Integrated Reporting Standards Board and the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standard Board, which is more US focused, trying to merge. And then there are various discussions up to the level where even that the core accounting standard setter, the IFRS, is now speaking about climate change, and they are discussing how they can inculcate some of these things into whatever they do. This is an exhibit of one of the Global Reporting Initiative's content index of one of the mining firms in Africa, which is Goldfields. It's in South Africa. And you see that from the top left, you see SDGs being reported. We have the GRI standard being reported and the individual disclosures under them. We have the page numbers for the various reporting and then where they can be located. We also have the UNGC, which is the United Nations Global Compact, also being reported. We have the ICMM also being reported. And then we also have the SASB, also, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Now, the point is that these companies adopting these reporting practices tend to the companies have to decide, but they see that all of them are important. So we see kind of generalization and combination of all these standards over time. But what is the motivation of this study that we try to look at the corporate governance and the climate change disclosure practices? Climate change is a key risk today. It's a health risk, it's a social risk, it is an economic problem. It has multi-dimensional impact on the economy and the world today. And there are definitions, or I'll not try to talk about those things for now. But the point is that spanning from 2010 to 2019 was the warmest decade, and aside 2016, since 1880. And we see that there have been very key discussions currently. Recently, the IPCC's recent report was released, and it shows that human involvement is critical in causing climate change. And what it means is that we all have to act. And the IPCC and the various discussions are talking about government, but the private sector also has to act. And for Africa, when we talk about the mining sector, Africa's natural resource, Africa is so endowed with regards to these natural resources, and mining activities are happening, energy activities are happening, and then the impact of all of these things are critical. And unfortunately, we don't have so strong regulation as compared to the West, and as compared to the West. And because of that, the damage and the impact of some of these things on the environment are critical. How are the firms acting? What are they doing? The energy sector is the mining sector is environmentally sensitive and connecting to energy and all of that. So there's also fear that the firms may be greenwashing. They are reporting on disclosure, but they are not actually doing what they say they are doing. And then for us to actually provide policy advice, we have to understand what is the impact of corporate governance. And corporate governance is the board of directors, the top management, the people that the shareholders select to control the affairs of the firm. What is their involvement? How is their features or their structures or the mechanisms affecting the disclosure practices? So two objectives: the extent of disclosure, then the second one is the determinants of the disclosure, connecting it to climate change. The study tried to look at more of an institutional theory approach. The data was from Libya, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa. Content analysis was conducted. We tried to look at the annual reports of these firms individually, corporate governance factors, and then we control for firm level factors and some macroeconomic factors also. And the study used the GRI index, which is kind of an index which is used by most of these firms in Africa. The SASB is used more in the US. But the GRI is used because of uniformity. Because of that, we try to use that. And then emissions. So the GRI 305 is on emissions. There are 7 indicators, and the study tried to use that. And the study data is from 2006 to 2019. The reports that were assessed were 220 reports, and then we did content analysis to codify them for mathematical modeling. These are the core indicators. And what happened was that we developed a climate change reporting index from these 7. It's more of kind of an average of the 7. There are discussions in the literature, but just for us to understand whether they are actually reporting or not. And for the codification, when a firm reports, we code it as 1. If not, we code them as 0. And there are various indicators that we looked at. So we used that based on previous studies that were done on the various things that we are looking at. So we have the board size and board independence. Board size is the number of people on the board. Board independence is the involvement of non-executive directors. So people that are not core management, they are not CEO, they are not CFO, but they are on the board. Those people have external expertise that they can bring to the company. And some of them are people that follow global issues. They are thought leaders, they are change makers, and then they can make impacts. So we try to look at that, and then cross-listing of the firms, the United Nations Global Compact membership of the firm. Then we look at some kind of macroeconomic indicator like the Human Development Index, and then the GDP. So we followed various methods that are in line with the literature. This is the result, the first result. I'll go straight with the result just for the discussion aspect. We saw that when we rank the various individual indicators, the one that is highest is direct greenhouse gas emission, which is scope 1, followed by scope 2. Then the least disclosed is on greenhouse gas emissions intensity. And this one was recently also added to the various to the standard. It's some of these the intensity, for example, is difficult to measure also. So some of those things could also impact some of how the level at which the disclosure happens. Then what we did is to do various tests and do econometric analysis of the results. I'll not try to bother you with those results. We try to check that for robustness. I presented them separately because of the spacing so that we can see the numbers over there. So the key results, the result that we got from the study is that large board size and board independence increases climate change reporting. So firms that have large board size and then the board is also independent, which means that the non-executive directors that are not core management, they tend to disclose more. And the explanation for something like that is that it means that some of these people have unique expertise and then additional expertise in some of these those global issues like the climate change, and they will be able to drive that. Then also we saw that generally reporting is not sensitive to either the multinational status or the industry that the firm is in. So the data, although we focus on the mining, we try to also look at the energy sector. And we saw that whether it's a mining sector or energy sector, reporting standard is still the same level. But for multinational, we suspected that because they have the headquarters that may be in those developed countries that push for these climate change issues, those multinational firms should be able to disclose more. But we don't see any significant difference, meaning that even the small firms are involved. Small, medium-sized firms are also involved in it. Then we saw diminishing rate of disclosure in that the very large size firms tend to disclose less. So we see more of an inverted U-shaped relationship between the size of the firm and the disclosure level. Then also we expected that cross-listed firms should be able to report more because some of the firms are in South Africa, but they are listed on the London stock market, the New York stock market, and those are stock market that have more stringent requirement. And then the investors there are more more sensitive to some of these issues. But surprisingly, those cross-listed firms tend to rather report less. Then also we see that the firms that are members of the United Nations Global Compact tend to disclose more. And this Global Compact is more of 10 principles that try to guide sustainable business practices. It's something that was sanctioned by even the C-suite executives. So we saw that firms that buy into it also disclose more, which is kind of showing that there's the need for more of engagement of various stakeholders, multidisciplinary perspective instead of focusing on just one. And we see that those firms that try to use the SDG, the SASB as well, also tend to also disclose some of these issues more, just like the UNGC. Then the Human Development Index, which is a measure of the health the state of health and education of the countries, we saw that the countries with high human development also tend to disclose more. It means that countries that are have people more educated will be able to disclose more. And then the education too has to be combined with the health issue. And climate change itself is a health issue. So if you are committed to health, you should be able to also be committed to climate change issues. But we saw that GDP growth tend to rather result, countries with high GDP growth have firms that are reporting less. And the problem is that the current GDP that we have is not actually a green GDP. It is blind on the various climate change issues and sensitivities to the environment. So those are some of the things that we have to keep talking about, and we have to change it and see how best the research committee and the various policymakers can make differences. The study is relevant for C-suite executives, the boards, in understanding some of these things, and then the choosing of the board is key, and stakeholders and shareholders have to be involved in some of these things when they are selecting even the board members and all of that. Then also, we see that disclosure is fine, and firms are trying to disclose, and we are trying to understand what is driving that disclosure. But aside disclosing, we need to actually add, because there's that tendency of greenwashing. Then there's also a need for multi-stakeholder approach, involvement of the UN, which is more of the International Development Organization, involvement of the private sector, think tanks, educational institutions, and all of those things are key for us also. And then firms also trying to follow the 10 principles of the UNGC is still key in that context. So as I argued, the involvement of the civil society, policy think tanks, especially in the African context, and then the organizations that work at the grassroots is very key in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Elisabeth Lambert. I have a question. You mentioned at the end that, of course, disclosure is fine, but it's not enough, and there is a need to reduce net emissions. So my question is, have you noticed that putting pressure to have more disclosure has had an impact in as to the emissions rates, or do we still have the same emissions rate along the study you have conducted? And the second question, I'm not sure I understood. Maybe you mentioned that at the beginning, but I didn't catch it. How did the firms, how did you select the firms which are being covered by your study? Was it on a voluntary basis, or how did you make it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. For the first question, which is on the fact that whether the emissions are reducing or not, the problem is that this kind of this study is structured in a way to look at the content of what the firms are telling us. But there is another aspect that tries to look at whether the auditors, because these days there are also calls for them to be audited. They put out a lot of numbers, and then some of these are not audited. The financials are actually audited, but the emissions information are not audited. Some of them have this audited information, some of them do not have. That is another aspect that the study would look at further. But it is something that we have to actually look at. There is also an argument in the literature that, well, the first step is to start a disclosure. If they are able to disclose, then the audit firms should push, the assurance firms should push, and then the various researchers and investigative people. Because sometimes they can still be giving us the information. They are the people involved in giving us the information, and it can still end up not being the reality. So it is something that I'm still looking further. I'm exploring more. It will be the next part of the project. Then, with regards to the selection of the sample, what we did is to look at, so it's kind of skewed towards larger firms because of the database we were using. We have the Global Reporting Initiative. They have a database that's firms that are complying with their standards, or that are aligned to them, are registered in that database. So in that database, some of the firms actually apply the principles. Some of them do not apply. So you see that the rate of disclosure will be higher as compared to if we were to go to the African countries and take kind of a survey of all the firms, depending on the various dynamics that they have. And some of these some of these mining firms and these energy firms are very big firms. And for the African context, the private ones that are not publicly owned or that are not that huge, some of them do not actually show their annual report or do not report on some of these things and make it public. So that is it about the data sampling.
Any other question?
Hello, thank you for the report. Yann Negruciu, École Normale Supérieure de Lyon. Now, emissions as you present them, that means essentially 20 greenhouse gas emissions, 20 different molecules of gas emissions. It seems to me that this is just the visible part of the iceberg when energy and mining activities are concerned. Is this the beginning of something that you have in mind that would actually tend to cover in corporate reporting pollution more generally, knowing that these energy and mining activities impact seriously through deforestation, land use change, water quality, and river state, to mention just a few of them. So going to a more constraining pollution reporting, I think it's absolutely unavoidable. Is this in the air?
Yes, I agree with your point. The disclosures are key, and but I think how it is, some of the firms are still not picking up because it comes with resources that have to come in, and some over here in Africa sometimes the people don't have the expertise to even go about it, and the GRI and the various institutions are trying to upskill them and train the people, but there's still more that has to be done in that regard. And I agree that the disclosures are key. If you come here connecting even to the water bodies, Ghana recently had an issue where a lot of the mining activities are so much serious, having impact on the water bodies until a lot of the water bodies, the water coming from even the tap that is run by the Ghana's water company was having problems. That the water that came is so polluted as if it was those kind of mining water. So these issues are very key, and the involvement of the stakeholders is still paramount. But the point is that because the knowledge is still limited, that's why the research in these areas are key to provide ideas about how to move, how to do the various things. And as suggested and as pointed out, the next phase is to go into whether emissions are going down or not, which is another aspect. And for these African countries, the targets that we have, we are not able to meet it. We are focusing on, sometimes the arguments are in the policy space is that you have to focus on poverty, not climate change, and all of that. But these things are still paramount, and policymakers have to act. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have two small questions. The first one is how these firms include the Paris Protocol objective in their strategy. And the second question is when you talk about the result of your estimation, you say that there are some policy relevance for regarding citizen and some policy recommendation and so on. But I didn't see these variables among these explanatory variables. Any factors related to consumer, to the citizen pressure, or any factor regarding policy stringency or the quality of institution in these countries? So.
Yeah, I think that is a very strong question. Thank you for that. On the principles, they mention it sometimes. It's not connected to their missions or vision. Some of them are trying to update their mission and vision to connect it to the climate change and the various indicators, the various global initiatives. But it's not up to that level. This work didn't go into that detail, but I think the next phase of the work will go into those qualitative issues and try to look at it. Then also on the variables, I think I will consider including some of those kind of institutional factors in the next phase of the work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I personally appreciate your presentation, because I think you use an online presentation, so you contribute to reducing impact on on the CO2 emission. So I appreciate
thank
this.
You, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
again.
Thank
Now
you.
we have the second presentation from Dr. Ozge Varis from she's assistant professor at the Kırklareli University in Turkey. So welcome, and the room of point.
Can you hear me? Good. Good morning again. I'm Ozge Varis and I'm an assistant professor at Kırklareli University, Turkey. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, to introducing me. And before I start my presentation, I would like to express my gratitude to all organizing committee, especially Professor Lambert for her great efforts, and Celine. And today, as you can see from my title, I will talk about how we can define sustainability under international investment law. Okay. In the background of this research, as we all know that many companies and also the states signing new treaties or agreements or green pledges and promising us to provide a better sustainable future. And of course, as a result, they are rearranging their policies. And on the other hand, the latest exit case law statistics indicated that almost half of their disputes, which means the investment disputes, are evolving from energy or related sectors, which we count them as all natural resources, which is a huge number actually. And on the other hand, we have the European Union, which has a very stimulating and ambitious energy transition and sustainability strategy, and she has been pursuing that strategy since 2010 officially. And despite the long-term policies, time to time we can still criticize the European Union, so it is still under scrutiny. In that regard, I asked myself that what is the definition of sustainable investments in energy sector? Because we have been hearing that term more and more in every day, but we are not sure that what should we understand or how we can define which investments are sustainable. So I ask two sub-questions too. What is sustainability at the end of the day? And secondly, how we define sustainability in legal point of view. In here, I had to analyze two main approaches. First one is international law perspective. The second one is the EU perspective. And while I was searching under international law, first, of course, I would like to check the United Nations system, how they define sustainability. And I couldn't see any legally binding, clear, explicit definition. And of course, there is no normative definition in other legal systems. But we have Sustainable Development Goals under the United Nations system, and we have 17 of them. United Nations said they're binding to each other, and previous researches and the presentations in this conference that we heard the similar things. They are all binding and have a cyclical approach. But still, we cannot define the sustainability. So, under international law, first of all, we have to visit 3 main sources generally while we are making our research. First, of course, the treaties. Secondly, generally customer law, which sustainable development, although is not a new concept, but it's a kind of new for lawyers. So we cannot check customer law in that sense, or we cannot claim that there is a customer law, but we can still check case laws. And in treaties, we all know and clearly see that even the treaties regarding environment are silent. And relevant treaties such as international trade treaties from the World Trade Organization or Energy Charter Treaty, multinational treaties I'm speaking, they are silent too, but we should keep in our mind that they are also under modernization process. But we can still see some case law examples, such as Pulp Mills River Uruguay MOX plant case, which was quite famous for the European Union, and also Tatar versus Romania, and some cases under WTO, World Trade Organization, dispute resolution processes. I'm going to mention only MOX plant case and Tatar versus Romania because we have a limited time in here. But in MOX plant case, Republic of Ireland came with a claim that because of the radioactive waste in the from the United Kingdom contaminating seas, and it affected badly their fisheries, so their agricultural policy. And in here, International Tribunal Law of the Sea came with a very interesting solution. Rather than giving a direct decision on whether it is Northern Republic of Ireland is right or United Kingdom was not guilty, the tribunal said that we have to put some provisional measures to prevent that contamination in the sea, to protect environment and life in the sea, which is a part of actually today one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And in Tatar versus Romania, which is a interesting conclusion that European Court of Human Rights decided that the mines, gold mines in Romania was contaminating and threat to a right to have a life to local people by their research and mining methods in that area, and it also affected their right to have a family and private life. When we come to the international investment law, which is of course a part of international law, we have 2 sources again: bilateral investment treaties or free trade agreements, as well as case law. First, I will explain the case law because arbitral tribunals in here, despite there is no jurisprudence constant system in international investment arbitration, they hold the sustainability-related issues in 3 different approaches. First, under public order, they held the issue to solve, or they held the issue to solve under human rights system, or they held the issue under state sovereignty or state autonomy. And for example, for under public order in Suez versus Argentina case, the tribunal made one of the most unexpected move and accepted amicus curiae brief and the third-party participation, which was NGOs and the civil society in that case, and said that that environmental law has a huge public interest, and as a result of that huge public interest, it's part of the public order. So in order to balance the interest of the actors, we have to accept the third-party participation and hear what they are saying. And in Orbezer versus Argentina case, despite that Argentina took some measures and shut down the investors' activities in the local area, investor went to arbitral tribunal and claimed the legitimate expectation. In here, Argentina said that it is part of the human rights as to protect environment, and because of the foreign investors' policies, local people have problems to reach water resources, as well as condemnation of the local water resources. And in here, again, the tribunal said that yes, this is the part of the human rights, and strangely they agree that they can decide on human rights and think that Argentina was right to provide those measures and shut down the activities of foreign investors. When we came to ACMEA, which we also know that's Euroca BV versus Slovak Republic, which was very important decision for the European Union because it came through the energy transition policy of the Union. And in here, the tribunal held the issue as a part of the state autonomy or state sovereignty, and said that Slovak Republic was a part of the European Union, and in order to pursue the sustainability and energy transition process, despite EU doesn't have any right to participate in here, Slovak Republic was right to take those measures and limited the activities of the investor. When we go to the bilateral investment treaties and FTAs, the new generation bilateral investment treaties have generally direct reference to sustainable development. The most explicit and as well as the vague one was the Morocco-Nigeria bilateral investment treaty, which was signed in 2016. And as we can see in here, that Article 24 directly said that parties should strive to make the maximum feasible contributions to sustainable development of the host state and the local community. But in here, we cannot be sure that what kind of contributions or what would be the limits of those contributions or how they will shape their sustainable development strategies. But I mentioned the free trade agreements, which European Union has a very strong framework for that. First of all, for the European Union, almost all free trade treaties and their international trade and investment policy has a very clear approach, and in their working papers or policy papers quite emphasize the different dimensions of the sustainable development, not only environmental or energy transition side, but as we can see in here that as well as the international labor standards or multilateral environmental agreements, and also the sustainable management of all natural resources, which is an important thing, fisheries, biodiversity, and carbon development, harvesting practices, which means also the agricultural policy of the European Union. Those are part of it. And these are also the part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And more clear example to understand in here, European Union and Korea Free Trade Agreement Article 13, it is about the trade, but it also gives us the standards that European Union and Korea should seek while they are making trade, or their investors while they were investing in each other countries. A beneficial role that core the labor standards, again we come. And then environmental goods and services, including environmental technologies, renewable energy, energy efficient products, all of them are part. But strangely, that economic efficiency is also in the core of this provision. But this is also the consistent of the nature of international investment law and international trade law. So it is understandable. When we come to the energy sector, which I mentioned in the very beginning that it is the core of international investment system, especially in the dispute settlement, we need to define energy, first of all, because if we don't know what should we understand from the energy, we cannot solve the issue. And my conclusion is energy is all necessary works for proceeding activities in energy sector, including pre-production stages, production and downstream activities. And that definition is quite holistic and comprehensive and consistent with the life cycle approach, I believe. But on the other hand, we have to remind ourselves that energy is a kind of public good, a commodity as well, can be tradable, and it is essential for industry and vital for the urban life. In that sense, energy has a direct effect on public policy and the needs of the actors, interest of the actors. This is not just investors or states, but also private individuals like us should be balanced while host states or all states were making their policies. And as I mentioned before, that treaties like the Energy Charter Treaty, for now, it is silent about how we can define or how we can regulate energy sector sustainably. And Spanish energy disputes, we know that, which is like the Acmea judgment, have the similar problem when any changes in the energy transition policy came with a problem for investors. And most of the time, especially in energy sector, tribunals focus on the state autonomy and their right to have change for more sustainable policies than the older ones. In a very rarely, they may refer human rights issues. But on the other hand, still the discussion is going on how they can define, how they can balance the interest. In here, I'm just going to mention a small thing, but just to open a further discussion for further researchers, that maybe theory of energy justice may help us to balance the interest of the parties, but it is just an idea. In a conclusion and to sum up, as we know that no normative definition or framework in international legal system, including international investment law, and that legal gap time to time causes a very huge disputes, so not all the time ended in a favor of the states or public benefits. And energy sector is a key in here. On the other hand, the related treaties, because I believe that sustainable development is not just about energy or environment, it's also about the labor standards, human rights, or equality between, and for example, International Labor Organization or Food and Agriculture Organization documents are silent as well, but as I said, that they are under modernization process. But we are lucky that new generation of bilateral investment treaties are more open to the idea of sustainability, and they don't hesitate to use direct referencing in here. And my general conclusion to hear that I believe that despite all we are lack of the normative definition, which I'm not sure that if we accept the sustainability as a concept, in international law we generally do not provide a normative definition, but we can still frame or put some criteria. What should we understand from a sustainable investment, or what kind of criteria we should assess while we are deciding an investment, whether it is sustainable or not? And I believe that we should be comprehensive in here too. So I believe a sustainable investment should be comply with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, comply with the environmental standards in international and domestic law of a host country, and consistent with the natural resources standards of international law and domestic law of the host country as well. Thank you very much.
So we have some minutes for questions. Okay, please.
Matthias Wansen, UNESCO Chair for River Culture. I think a big difference in understanding sustainability is in the economic world and in the socio-ecological world. Sustainability in economic context means that you keep the firm or the enterprise going. So you can, for example, if you have totally exhausted one resource, you can switch to another and exploit this one, and then you switch to the next. Whereas in the socio-ecological context, it really means that each of these resources should be maintained and should be managed in a way that they can see the future. And I think this is a very important point that has to be made in the preambles of legal constructs. And then on the other hand, the sustainability criteria, I would say, vary between the different socio-ecosystems that we are talking about. So I really liked your conclusions and your approach to check the individual SDGs, because there are working groups that have a detailed notion about the referred system. If you're talking life under in the sea, for example, then you have marine ecologists that can tell you about fish stocks, for instance. So it really needs to be broken down to the system that is under consideration.
Thank you. This was a good remark.
Just to, I would like to moderate your remarks. In economics, we discussed also about the problem of associable resources, but sustainability, in fact, this can correspond to different concept definition, like we talk about weak and strong sustainability, and we can have the problem of exhaustive resources. But the big concern is how is the substitution between different natural resources. That's the point. I don't know if this other question from the audience. Otherwise, please.
I get the impression from your presentation that maybe the fragmented approach we have in law is even worse now with those bilateral treaties, where you have different ways of referring to sustainable development. But maybe I'm wrong. What's your opinion on that? Or do you think that those bilateral treaties in investment law make bridges between investment law and human rights, between investment law and environmental law? So what's your view on that?
Actually, this is a very interesting and very good question. That first of all, the bilateral investment treaties are binding for both states and their investors, and they have enforcement mechanism, and after the arbitral tribunals, parties of the dispute, host state and the investor, can enforce in their countries or in the host state based on the New York Convention. So they are clear and easy to enforce. They are quite enforceable at the end. When we look at the climate treaties or sustainable development related treaties, they generally have that lack of enforcement mechanism. I mean, in that sense, while I was reading them, and when I consider the development regarding the sustainable development globally, that I can feel that actually those instruments maybe not written or signed to be a soft law instrument, but at the end of the day, in the application and in practice, they are considered as a soft law, not as a hard law like the BITs. And in that sense, yes, when the claim comes, arbitral tribunal may say that I don't have a competence to consider that issue as a part of my in that dispute, or said that okay, based on the competence rule theory, yes, I can check that. In case of for example, in Urbaser, it was quite unexpected because normally in the literature and the doctrine, we don't think that human rights issues can be discussed under international investment law, but tribunal accepted it. On the other hand, with those direct references in the new generation of bilateral investment treaties, as I said, that they can be the breach to be more enforceable, as long as they have the reference. Because at the end of the day, when any tribunal, any arbitrator see the file, they first define their competences based on checking the reference treaties, mostly bilateral investment treaties or some multilateral investment treaties like the Energy Charter Treaty, if they have a clear investment chapter.
If I may, my question was more about the risk of a fragmented approach because of those diverse provisions. Yes. So have you noticed in arbitral decisions cross-references to human rights decisions?
Yes.
So that the standard is the same, or is there a risk that with those bilateral treaties, the standard as to a sustainable development would be weaker, for instance?
Well, in my
Thank you.
personal opinion, I'm finding quite risky to an independent arbitrator or independent arbitral tribunal decide on human rights. I would prefer to hold the issue under sustainable development rather than the human rights, because human rights is a different legal regime which is different separately. But sustainable development, in the bilateral investment treaties, they have a direct reference. So as long as there's a direct reference, I don't believe that it is a risk to interpret what is the sustainable investment or what is sustainability under international law.
Sorry, but I would like to add, to continue the question posed by Professor Lambert. I think the real risk of lowering standards, because you have not only the multiple approaches, but you have also the conflict between different objectives. For example, between economic development and between environmental protection. In some countries, they have some priorities to economic development over environmental protection, and this is the case. You have a big room for example, mining and oil firms, which can invest in their countries, and they can generate pollution and so on. Okay, So I think there also these kind of risks that can lower standards about the definition of sustainability.
No, I agree with you. That's why while I was defining my own framework, I try to be more holistic and comprehensive. And especially yesterday's presenters emphasized that all those sustainability approaches and sustainable development goals should work together. But on the other hand, yes, the main idea of any international economic law regimes that providing an economic efficiency, but it also the European Union is saying both in free trade agreements and also their policy paper. So it is not extremely different. On the other hand, while arbitrators were assessing those claims, that they also check international law or international standards as well as the domestic ones. They are not just binding with the domestic regulations.
Okay, the last question, please.
Rather a comment about accounting. When talking about this economic aspects and the economic development of a country, very often the environmental costs are not at all taken into consideration. So I think in this context we really need to have a better accounting of environmental costs and future environmental costs of exploitation of resources, for instance.
I believe that that's why I told that, for example, Monaco and Nigeria BIT is quite vague to understand how we can set the standards. But I believe that we may need a more enforceable sustainable development or environmental treaties to set those standards rather than expecting from the states.
Okay, thank you very much for your participation, presentation and question and answer. So we finish the session now, and thank you.